In November 1941, a battalion of exhausted, outnumbered soldiers stood between Hitler's army and the road to Moscow. For 3 days they held the line. Their commander wasn't a career general from a military dynasty. He was a former teacher and district clerk from the Kazakh steppe. Decades later, military academies in the United States and Israel would still be studying how he did it. This is Bauyrzhan Momyshuly. Momyshuly was born in 1910 into a family of nomadic herders in what is now southern Kazakhstan. He lost his mother early and was raised largely by relatives, moving through several boarding schools as a child. His early career had nothing to do with the military. He worked as a teacher, then in local administration and finance, before being drafted into the army in his early 20s. By the time Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Momyshuly was serving as a battalion commander in the famous Panfilov division, a unit that would become legendary for its defense of the approaches to Moscow. What happened next didn't just make him a decorated officer, it made him the subject of one of the most widely read military novels of the 20th century, Volokolamsk Highway, and eventually turned him into one of Kazakhstan's most respected writers in his own right. Momyshuly's approach to command stood out from the wartime norm in one specific way. He had little patience for reckless heroism. Where some commanders treated suicidal bravery as the highest virtue, Momyshuly treated discipline, preparation, and calculated patience as the real markers of a good soldier. He believed that panic and disorganized courage got soldiers killed for nothing, while calm, disciplined execution of a plan, even a plan that required retreating, strategically or waiting out an assault, actually won battles and saved lives. This wasn't caution for its own sake. It was the recognition that emotion, however brave feeling in the moment, is a poor substitute for a clear head under pressure. This is part of why his methods held up to serious military study long. After the war ended, he wasn't relying on luck or sacrifice. He was building repeatable, disciplined processes that other officers could actually learn and apply. Momyshuly insisted that military command was a serious discipline, something closer to an art or craft that had to be studied and practiced, not something you could improvise your way through on instinct alone. He spent his post-war years teaching, writing, and formally studying military strategy, treating his own wartime experience as raw material to be analyzed, rather than simply survived. This mindset shows up clearly in his writing. His books weren't just war memoirs. They were closely observed studies of how soldiers actually behave under extreme stress, what breaks people, and what holds them together. He was, in a sense, doing for military leadership what a scientist does for a subject, extracting reusable principles from lived experience. Many soldiers who survive brutal combat try to move past it, to leave the war behind them once it's over. Momyshuly took the opposite approach. He spent much of the rest of his life writing about what he had witnessed, not to relive the trauma for its own sake, but to extract lessons from it that could prepare the next generation. This required a specific kind of discipline, the willingness to sit with difficult memories long enough to understand them clearly, instead of pushing them away. It's a harder path than simply moving on, but it's also how his experience ended up outliving him, not just as personal history, but as material still used to train soldiers today. You don't need to be a battalion commander to use what Momyshuly modeled. First, under pressure, discipline beats improvised bravado almost every time. When you're facing a stressful deadline, a conflict, or a crisis, the instinct to act fast and dramatically often feels satisfying, but a calm, prepared response usually produces a better outcome. Second, treat your own hard experiences as material to study, not just events to survive. After a difficult project, relationship, or setback, take the time to actually analyze what happened, what worked, what didn't, what you'd do differently. That's the difference between an experience that just happens to you and one that actually makes you better prepared next time. Third, real mastery in any field, leadership included, comes from treating it as a craft. You deliberately study, not a talent you either have or don't. Momyshuly's edge wasn't natural fearlessness. It was the discipline to turn experience into a repeatable method. Bauyrzhan Momyshuly went from a village teacher to a commander whose methods are still studied on the other side of the world, decades after his death. Not because he was reckless, but because he treated discipline itself as the highest form of courage. If stories like this are useful to you, subscribe. Every week we go inside the minds of history's most disciplined thinkers and leaders. See you in the next one.